Hi, I'm Stephanie, and welcome to my TBR Rewind series, episode 5, where we're tackling my TBR from bottom to top.
Today we are talking about Hotel by Arthur Hailey. So this was published in 1965, and Arthur Hailey is a British-Canadian novelist who lived from 1920 to 2004. And from the research I've done, each of his novels has a different industrial or commercial setting. So in addition to hotel, there's airport, wheels, detective as some examples. And in all of the books, it seems like ordinary characters become involved in a crisis. I know this is from 1965 because when I requested it from my library, it took much longer than normal to get it to my branch, which I thought was unusual. And then when I received it, you can definitely tell that this was the original volume published in 1965. So that's pretty neat. It smells like old book. It has the font of an old book from 1965 and no dust jacket. So I'm pretty sure they had to go into their archives and find it, which is why it took a little bit longer. Also, there is a sticker on the back in terms of when the book was checked out. It doesn't have any 60s. The oldest date on here is 1998, but it has definitely been through the ringer. So in synopsis, this book takes place over 5 days, so a week, Monday through Friday. And it follows the lives of the guests, the management, and the workers at one of New Orleans' largest and most elite hotels, the St. Gregory Hotel. So the owner has 4 days to raise enough money to save his financially failing property, and the general manager, once blacklisted from the hotel business due to scandal, struggles with one crisis after another. And then there's a rebellious heiress who will do anything to attain her secret desires, and then a duke and duchess in the lavish presidential suite who are covering up a crime. And within one of the many guest rooms is a professional thief. So I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed this book. There were so many intertwining storylines, notable characters. There's a kind of cliffhanger beginning and a cliffhanger ending event. And it really brings you into this luxury hotel life in the 1960s while still tackling some of the relevant social issues of the time. So the protagonist is the assistant general manager, Peter McDermott. He is very likable. He's flawed. He's young, but he's trying to do the right thing in the confines of what he believes his role is and the confines of the social constructs of just the time that this takes place. The plot lines are relatively simple, but it does tackle themes of civil rights, social justice, racism, sexism, sexual assault, murder, and wealth inequality. It did sometimes, or the structure of it does have the feel of like a standard thriller novel of maybe a modern Dan Brown or James Patterson, but the prose and the word selection was so much more elevated. It didn't feel like it was pandering to the general masses, like a mass market thriller like that would, though I do think this was a mass market thriller back in the 60s, but the language is just elevated. It's smart. There are words that I had to look up. So I think that was nice not to feel that the prose was just too simple or too easy to get through. It also adds to the ambiance of making you feel like you're in this luxury 1960s environment. Also, some of the definitions, you definitely get the feel, and I do believe some of his books have been turned into films, but you definitely get the vibe of like a 1960s TV show with these quirky characters. Things I didn't like about it, the women characters, I think some of them are strong and some of them do play a role, but I think they're stereotypical roles of women in general, and then also in this time. So 2 of them are secretaries. One of them is the Duchess. She's very strong, but she's also the witchy, woman basically leading her man along, even though he gets the spotlight. There's also the rich heiress. She is she's the younger side and acts like a petulant young child. So I think there probably could have been more depth to the women characters. They just sort of play their role, but you don't really get to learn a whole lot about the thoughts, their inner thoughts, their motives, etc. Other things I think it could have done, it does tackle the civil rights era and explicit racism within the hotel industry. So even though civil rights had passed, there were hotels that would just refuse to allow particularly Black residents to book the hotel. Or there's a plot line where a Black man had made a reservation and he comes in and they tell him there's no rooms. And he's like, but I have a confirmed reservation. And it's sort of this back and forth. And I think Peter, wants to do the right thing, but knows what his boss would say. And sort of it blows up and news organizations get involved. And it's sort of an interesting take on it. It does show how some white groups, while they wanted and were against racism, they had a difficult time navigating how to do so while still respecting the diverse views, however wrong they were, of their clientele or of their members of their organization. So it touched a little bit on that and gave some behind the scenes on how that thought process might have been. So I thought that was interesting. Probably my favorite part about this book was just getting a little bit of a view behind the workings of a hotel. You get to go into like the kitchen, into where they process the trash, not in a formal way, but it definitely just touches on it. And who was working down there and how that process went. It talks about how all kinds of things get thrown away, like, forks and knives and things incidentally, and how recovering that really saves the hotel a lot of money. If you saw my review of A Walk Around the Block, it's not nonfiction like that, but it is similar to some of those little insights into the workings of the hotel, the elevators, things of that nature. And so I find that to be really interesting, and I always like to learn something from my books, even though I really just picked this up. Well, I picked it up because it was on my TBR, but I enjoyed the fact that it was just a mystery thriller. I wasn't looking to learn anything from it, but so I was happily surprised that I was able to do so. Overall, again, this is a very enjoyable read for me. I finished it in over a weekend, and I gave Hotel by Arthur Haley 4.5 stars. And next up for my TBR Rewind will be Olga Dies Dreaming by Xochitl Gonzalez. It's 2017, and Olga and her brother Pedro Prieto Acevedo are bold-faced names in their hometown of New York. Prieto is a popular congressman representing their gentrifying Latinx neighborhood in Brooklyn, while Olga is the Tony wedding planner for Manhattan's power brokers. Despite their alluring public lives, behind closed doors, things are far less rosy. Olga and Pietro's mother, Blanca, a young lord turned radical, abandoned her children to advance a militant political cause, leaving them to be raised by their grandmother. Now, within the winds of hurricane season, Blanca has come barreling back into their lives. Set against the backdrop of New York City and the months surrounding the most devastating hurricane in Puerto Rico's history, Olga Dies Dreaming is a story that examines political corruption, familial strife, and the very notion of the American dream, all while asking what it really means to weather a storm. I actually did not realize that this was modern. For some reason, the name made me feel like this took place in a different era, but that's fine. So we'll go ahead and get started on this, and then I'll check in with you in a bit.
Today we're going to be talking about Olga Dies Dreaming by Xochitl Gonzalez. This was published in 2002. And Xochitl Gonzalez is an American novelist who is a native of Brooklyn, New York. She's written a few other novels, including Anita Del Monte Laughs Last and Last Night in Brooklyn. This book surprised me. I enjoyed it far more than I initially anticipated that I would. At first, I struggled to connect with the characters, particularly Olga. I just thought she was very full of herself and was living this life that I really couldn't relate to in terms of the rich and famous. But as the narrative unfolds across these three sort of intertwined perspectives with Olga, her brother, and then their mother, I found myself drawn into more of the emotional core of the novel. There's a lot of vulnerability beneath each of the characters. And then I also connected with this fiercely independent matriarch of their mother, who wrestles with the tension of trying to be a mother versus really just being a taskmaster. And I related to that on a personal level. Where the novel fell a little short for me was its handling of the title itself. So Olga Dies Dreaming is actually drawn from Pedro Prietri's poem. That was a lot of alliteration. Puerto Rican Obituary. And once I looked this poem up and read it independently after I had finished the book, I found it stunning. I really wish the author would have included the poem directly into the book, and that way you could have referenced it along with the text where it refers to the poem. I think this would allow readers to experience what the author was experiencing, having read that poem and then written a story that really showcased the hardship of immigrant life, and particularly in this case, Puerto Rican immigrants. The novel is pretty loose. So if you're a heavily plot-driven reader, there really is no plot. There's some tiny plots with some of her wedding characters. There is a love interest, but I really don't think that it was developed very well. There's also a really bizarre subplot, and I don't think this is a spoiler since it doesn't have really any relation to the main plot, but Olga gets involved in laundering goods from the Russian mafia, and no one seems to really care. And when she eventually tells people towards the end, they're just like, oh, okay, well, I guess we'll figure that out. I was like, what? So that was really bizarre. And again, didn't relate to anything else about the story. It was just this random subplot they threw in there. I guess maybe to give her this weak point that could be exploited, but I didn't think it actually ever was. So that being said, this novel has a lot of themes. So it doesn't shy away from being very ambitious. You have LGBTQ identity, the HIV/AIDS crisis, a lot of fractured family dynamics, divorce, grandparents raising grandchildren, addiction, a little bit of sexual violence. There's a trigger warning. Also touches on colonialism and government corruption. So it's a lot of themes that go through it, but I think the author does them very well. And if any of those are something that you can relate and connect to, I think you'll find parts of this novel either comforting depending on the theme or maybe a little triggering, but I think those aspects are done well. So overall, I gave Olga Dies Dreaming 4 stars. So next up on my TBR list is Afterlives by Abdul Razak Gurnah. And let me read you a synopsis. While he was still a little boy, Elias was stolen from his parents by the German colonial troops. After years away, fighting in a war against his own people, he returns to his village to find his parents gone and his sister Afia given away. Another young man returns at the same time. Hamza was not stolen for the war, but sold into it. And he has grown up at the right hand of an official whose protection has marked his life. With nothing but the clothes on his back, he seeks only work and security and the love of the beautiful Afia. As fate knots these young people together, and as they live and work and fall in love, the shadow of a new war on another continent lengthens and darkens, ready to snatch them up and carry them away. So this was published in 2020 and is a work of historical fiction. It has been longlisted for a couple of prizes. So stay tuned for my thoughts on Afterlives, and we'll see you next time. Bye.